digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we are joined once again by Brian Baglow, formerly of Team Rock, now with Digit. I'm not going to faff about with your fancy title because it is a fancy title, Brian, but amongst other things also the founder of the Scottish Games Network. We also have with us the lovely Liam, who is back from Rift, who is, the Rift Group, specifically the video games tax credit expert on the ground, if that's right, Liam.
Oh, I don't know about expert, but I do try my best.
Well, why don't you explain for our lovely listeners exactly what you do over at Rift Group, and then they can understand a little bit more about what you do.
Okay, so I head the video games tax relief department within the research and development tax credits area. So we deal with all nature of innovation taxes and video games taxes, and also look to help signpost people to such things like private investors and potential European grants.
Wonderful, thank you. And Brian, given that you do so many things, it's a dizzying array of different things that you do, why don't you tell our lovely listeners exactly what you're up to these days?
Sure. So I'm currently working with the team at Digit, which is a new technology website. It has a very simple goal. It wants to be the voice of the tech sector in Scotland. Believe it or not, Scotland has some fantastically creative, talented and innovative companies up here, but you'd never know it because Scottish media tends to ignore them in favour of stories about witchcraft, sheep and shipbuilding. So this is my first foray after 20 odd years of working the dark side as a PR marketing kind of guy. I'm now working as a journalist. It's quite disconcerting. Thoroughly enjoying it. There's a lot more free lunches than I ever thought. But it has highlighted to me the woeful state of PR and social media agencies who very clearly are getting money for doing nothing. Trying to get a press kit out of companies is just, it's like asking for a lightly grilled stoat on a brioche. So, yeah, it's been something of an experience.
Brian, I always knew that having you back was going to be brilliant.
Thank you very much.
I'm enjoying this already.
I know, this is brilliant. So, what I wanted to talk about, rather than the state of Scottish food and its comparisons to PR kits, what I wanted to do today was talk about getting funding, that elusive, magical myth of funding for indie game studios and indie VR studios, these people who are essentially trying to raise funds to be able to build whatever that wonderful vision or dream is. And the first thing I'm going to throw into the arena, because I know both of you have a lot to say about this, but the first thing I'm going to throw into the arena is a personal bugbear of mine, which is that because of the nature of the entrepreneurial landscape and the way that, people have got funding of late in the last kind of 5 to 10 years, there is this absolute obsession for anybody who is starting a new studio that the assumption is they must get equity funding. They must get an investor, a private investor or VC or whoever, to come in, give them some money, and in exchange, they get a percentage of your business. And it really does frustrate me that seems to be the only knowledge of how people think that they can raise funds for their studio, is that they've got to get an investor. They've got to give away some chunk of their business in order to be able to get the funding that they need. So I'm going to open the floor to you, gentlemen, to help to dispel this myth and make me feel better about the fact that we're helping to educate some folks today, because it really does frustrate the living crap out of me that most people seem to think that's the only way that they can really get funding. So I'm going to start with you, Liam, just because I think you've probably got the most to say on this. What would you say are the alternatives to equity funding?
Yeah, first of all, equity funding, it's a complete myth that it's the only route to go down. There's obviously the UK Games Fund, the grants and such things like that, the route you can go down. It is closed currently, but obviously they will be opening the doors to them once again. To go down that route, you would have to really ask yourself the big question, am I investable? Am I a company that someone would want to invest in or give a grant to? You may have to go down the route of actually finding someone and paying them good money to actually write you a grant or write you actually a piece of legislation or a piece of paperwork to actually application your grant. There's other means though. I know some people obviously go down the crowdfunding route. I actually have some contacts myself that are experts within crowdfunding.
Oh, we're going to talk crowdfunding. We're saving that for, saving that for later. Keep going.
Okay.
Keep
But there is
going.
another route. There is definitely other routes out there. There's big alternatives out there.
Mhm.
Grants are obviously the very big one. There's UK-based grants, European-based grants. But the main thing is when it comes to these things, is knowing the right people and knowing that you are investable and getting someone to actually write your application for you,
Mhm.
because that's when you actually look more serious.
But it's also that thing of most people don't actually know how to write or jump through all the hoops that are required. And actually one of the things that, again, these guys, they're here for you. The BFI actually have a certification program to basically facilitate you to get a BFI certification that helps you to be able to get money back from the tax man, amongst other things.
Yep, that.
But you can also use that BFI certification essentially as a promissory note against an investment. But again, in terms of how you get that BFI certification, it's pretty straightforward. It's not complex at all. And there's an entire team, such as Anna Massey over at the BFI, who are dedicated to helping people to understand how they qualify for certification. And certification does apply to video games as well as film. And again, it's that common misconception from a lot of people that if it's not a pure, I'm saying a big inverted commas, a pure game, that they can't apply for BFI certification. And in fact, actually, BFI certification can and does apply to VR as well.
Yes.
So Brian, I'm kind of curious from your perspective, because one of the things that Liam said that, and it's actually really important and so very relevant, and you know this as much as I know this, which is it is very much down to the people you know. It's down to who's in your network and how well you are known and how well you know other people as to whether or not you find the right people who've got the money. So I'm kind of curious from your perspective, what are the kind of alternative routes you would initially throw out on the table in terms of ways that you can get access to the funding or access to the people who know where the money is at?
Well, I think one of the points that Liam brought up was incredibly relevant, and from your opening diatribe, I think you're absolutely right that people tend to think funding and immediately jump to the whole Dragon's Den idea. But I think we need to take a step back and look at the game as a whole, because there are a couple of fundamental issues that I've seen occur time and again over the last 20 odd years. And I think it's still a massive skills and understanding gap that we have. So we have more and more people coming out of games degrees, game design, game development degrees, and they're graduating with literally no business skills whatsoever. They've got the technical skills, they're creative, they can throw a game together, they know how to use all the tools. But in terms of being an entrepreneur, and this is what we're primarily talking about, because the opportunities for more and more of the people coming out of the universities is entrepreneurial. But when it comes to starting up a business, they literally don't really know how to start. And we have an awful lot of help. The infrastructure is slightly different between Scotland and England, but there's still quite a considerable amount of help out there. But we have an issue in the game sector, which is that running a company is almost a byproduct. It's the poor guy that was at the bar getting the drink when you decided you were a studio who becomes the CEO, because he has to stop making games and go and learn things like payroll or find an office or, God forbid, do business development. And this is why I think we have so few companies in the game sector specifically which are innovating in the same ways that companies in the tech sector are doing. Because games companies in some ways almost get a free pass. You go, hey, we're a game studio. And all the development agencies, whether they're economic or cultural, tend to go, hey, we need more of you guys. Welcome to the fold. Rather than going, really? Are you? Or, and this is just going to be me sounding cynical, are you four guys who are graduating from university who have got one idea for a game? Is that what that is? That's not a business, that's a team. And if you want to be a team, by all means, go out, bootstrap yourself, get your game out onto the market, see how it works. Because, and again, a lot of the opportunities to experiment and explore and put your content out in front of a global audience exist for everybody these days. You could be a team of 12-year-olds working at an early stage, a code club at a high school, and just as easily as you could be a 20-person startup who have got decades of experience in launching games. But we have this issue, which is we're not teaching the business skills and how to run a company that we are alongside the tools, the technologies, and the processes of actually making a game. Far too few students are emerging with any experience. They'll get up, they'll make a game, but it'll never be released. And so they've not got the experience of putting it out onto the market and watch die screaming and alone because not even their mum wants to download it.
But you know what? You're really right here, which is that I remember speaking at an event. I forget what the event was, but I do remember Oscar Clarke was on the same panel. And I remember that we were talking about something, and then there was this bit at the end where during the Q&As, somebody said something to the equivalent of, why do we have to worry about making money? Can't we just make games for the love of making games? To which I said something to the equivalent, it's really nice that you are passionate and you want to make games, but somebody also has to keep the lights on. And
I was about to say the same thing. It's like, it's not going to save the bailiffs coming around, is it?
Do you know what I mean? It is this thing that I think there is this perception of the games industry, which is that it is full of people who love what they do and they're very passionate about gaming and entertainment and sci-fi or whatever the thing may be. They're very passionate, and so there seems to be this kind of, as you say, Brian, this kind of free pass of, oh well, don't worry, it's okay if you don't know how to actually maintain a business or do things like HR or payroll. That's okay. We don't mind because you're a game studio, so therefore you make up for it with the passion that you have, and I do think there is a certain degree of kind of, let's not worry too much about the future. But it's interesting that you say this, Brian, because this is actually also a personal bugbear of mine when it comes to the VR industry as well as the games industry. And it doesn't matter whether you're a VR game studio or you're a VR 360 film studio, but I think the same attitude is currently very, very prevalent, which is, it doesn't really matter if you've never had any business experience whatsoever. It doesn't matter if you've never actually built a game or a 360 film experience. As long as you're saying that you are a VR studio, that's okay. It's like you get away with it. And I have to wonder, at what point do we at least put some kind of minimum basic standard in place where we say, okay, you're saying this, but can you prove it? And I'm curious, what would be that minimum bar that we require in order for somebody who's potentially thinking about investing in a studio to be able to feel comfortable to know that they can actually manage the basics of day-to-day business handling?
Well, I think we have to make a distinction here. There are people out there in the creative world who just want to make things, and that's wonderful, and more power to them. One of the strengths of the whole indie scene, whether it's games, VR, or moving out into the rest of the creative world, there are people who just want to make things, and we need to recognise that that's fine, but we be able to recognise the difference between the people who just want to do things and will do things in their spare time or because it's the passion, and the people who want to make this their livelihood and who want to keep the lights switched on and who want to pay their staff and want to make it a part of their career or their entire career. So, we do have to start looking at the creative industries as industries. And I run into problems time and time again with people who think that I just cheapen the whole thing. But the reality is, without somebody at some point giving you money, then you're a hobbyist. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But we do have to have some criteria, as you say. If you look at the wider tech sector, and whether you like it or not, games and VR are part of the wider tech sector, albeit they're completely special and unique snowflakes, albeit that they're not like anything else, and albeit that we're creative and, programmers just aren't. We do have to start recognizing that there are certain hoops that have to be jumped through or hurdles that have to be faced if you're a tech company that seem to vanish if you're a games or VR company, because it's so hot right now, and the people who potentially control funding don't necessarily understand what the hell it is you're doing. So if you start a technology company, you want to start a software as a service, or you want to do something to disrupt the financial sector, or you've got a health tech company or education, at every single point, you are going to be challenged. Is this actually an idea? Is this an idea commercially viable? Am I going to be able to do it? What can I do? What can I not do? Where are the skills gaps? You have to go and build a business plan. I've got a fantastic analogy. It's pretty much impossible if you look at the rest of the creative world. You cannot start, or you cannot create a film or a television program or a stage play without a script. Similarly, you cannot start a business in pretty much any other area without a business plan. But I know a series of games companies who have existed for 10, 15 years perfectly happily without one. And, in some cases it works, but we're looking at the exceptions rather than the rest of the companies who are sustaining themselves on a project for a couple of years and then vanishing. But look at those guys. They did quite well. And we're missing the fact that we have this huge knowledge gap that we're still not addressing.
But that is the thing, though, is that when you look at those types of companies, it is a one-hit wonder. It is literally that they are living and sustaining their studio from one core IP for, maybe even up to a decade before somebody calls time on it. But the other thing that I think is kind of worth remembering and kind of noting as well is this idea that I know for a fact that the majority of the small indie studios that I have kind of gone in to speak to, the first thing I always ask for is a forecast. And the amount of times I get this blank look of, like I've spoken a different language or I've grown an extra head. But when I ask for a forecast, it is like the most shocking thing I could possibly have asked. And yet with any other type of startup, that would be the assumption of the first thing I would ask for, is to see the evidence and the proof that they have thought about the financial viability of the idea or the concept and its long-term sustainability. And yet with game studios, it is this thing of, well, we made a pretty game. Look, it does this pretty thing. You can jump and you can shoot and you can do all these cool things. And why would I need to worry about the money? Why would I need to worry about the forecasting? And it is quite interesting. I'm curious, Liam, from your perspective. Obviously, you also see a lot of people who are coming to you and talking about different types of IP or intellectual property. And, Brian's kind of said it, and I know that I just reinforced it, which is this idea that a lot of studios do only really think about one specific idea. And that's all they'll ever have in the lifetime of that studio is one idea. It's very rare that we find studios who have multiple IPs that are long-term sustainable or what we might call evergreen. And I'm curious from your perspective, what kind of conversations you're having with people or what you see happening when people come to you with their IP and it really is a very limited idea or a limited IP. And what do you say? What do you do in those scenarios?
First thing I always say is, especially with IP, is do you have it protected? That is one of the main things. If this is something new and fresh, do you have your IP protected? 9 times out of 10, they will turn around to me and say no. And that would be my first piece of advice. First, get yourself in order and get your IP protected, because at the end of the day, you don't own it until you own that piece of paper saying you have an IP protection on it. The other thing I always get, because obviously with tax credits, I have to see their accounts and such things like that. When I ask for the accounts, quite like you were saying about forecasting, I get the blanks expression as well. It's like, oh, we don't really have anything on our accounts. It's done on backs of pieces of paper, and they're everywhere. So it's the same thing. It's just getting yourself in order with that. But on the other side of you saying about the IP, yes, new IP, and most definitely with private investment, they're more interested in having something new and fresh that they can make a return on or see a return somewhere along the line than they would be with an old IP that is worn out and overused. Because they want to see something that they can invest in. And actually, if this is in private investors anyway, they want to see something that they can make money back on. And you have to remember, unfortunately, that's business. I'm going to be the cynical one here. They want to see money back on their investment.
It's interesting that you say this, though, because to a certain extent, I'm going to disagree with you on this. Because if we look at the games industry and the film industry, actually, creativity and new ideas is actually not something that people tend to be very open to. We tend to be very much about the existing proven IP. So this is why we see so many films that are actually adaptations from a book, or I hate to say it and kind of bring this one up, or the terrible adaptations of games into movies. I've yet to see a good movie that's been made based off a game. But
I disagree with you there. Silent Hill wasn't too bad.
Okay, apart from horror, which I don't watch, but just generalistically, it's one of those things that it's always about taking ideas, whether it's from existing books, existing comics, whatever that thing may be. And one of the things that we're seeing a huge upturn trend in, and it has been going on for at least the last decade, is reboots. I mean, if anybody else says the word reboot to me, I might just go a little bit AWOL, because everything we're seeing now on the TV, certainly, it's all reboots of previous franchises, previous ideas that are proven, that have a proven audience and a proven fan base. And to a certain extent, games is like that as well, in as much as if we look at the big AAA franchises, I've yet to see any AAA studio, apart from Blizzard with Overwatch, really be confident enough with a totally new IP, because most of these big AAA studios, it's just iterations on the existing franchise. And whether that's Call of Duty, whether that's Tomb Raider, whether that's Assassin's Creed, it's just the next iteration of Assassin's Creed. It's not a new IP. It's not another IP that they're creating within their studio. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this, Brian, in terms of, do you feel that Liam's right in as much as it is about new IP, or do you feel like there is a little bit of a, we don't want to try anything new, we want to go with proven IP?
Well, I think this is this is almost a topic in its own right, because it's very clear to a lot of people that the AAA market, the console market, which is primarily AAA, the sort of the middle ground, is vanishing very, very quickly. It's incredibly risk averse, and rightly so. If you're in Electronic Arts or Blizzard and Activision, whoever you happen to be, if you're investing tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars into a new franchise, it's a risky business. And as a responsible company, you have to minimize or mitigate that risk. So you have to find something that you know has an audience, or something that you can use to de-risk that process. So this is why you have the licenses. This is why you have sequels and franchises being built out from existing games. You know there's an audience there. So I can absolutely understand why that happens. But it does mean that in the console sector, we're getting, fewer and fewer innovation in terms of the games that are coming out of nowhere, making people go, oh my God, because it is inherently risky. The indie market, if you are bootstrapping yourself, you're supporting yourself, there's 2 or 3 people working on a small project in their spare time, then you can afford to be that little more risk-friendly, and you can afford to innovate a lot more, which is why you're seeing so much awesome and interesting things coming out of the indie end of the market. But again, the whole model for AAA is in some ways broken, because it still relies primarily on the old retail, as in, you give us the money, get the game, and until you give the money, you can't play the game. Whereas if you look at the rest of the market, primarily mobile, but increasingly anything that's online, you're looking at either free-to-play subscription or some of the more modern business models and revenue streams coming in. And I think that's where the whole idea of a lack of business knowledge comes back into play, because what you're seeing is far too few games companies are looking at business models and revenue streams creatively. Because you can look at free-to-play, and instead of going, oh God, free-to-play is killing the market, I hate it, I would never pay a free-to-play game, I suppose we'll have to make it free-to-play because otherwise nobody will ever buy our game and we'll die lonely and alone. But instead of doing that, you could actually look at free-to-play and go, okay, how do we innovate? How do we go beyond this? And the sad reality is that if you're ignoring or just hoping that the business model that you've picked is right for your game, then you're setting up for failure. You cannot make a game and then after you've made it go, so is this free to play? Is it premium product? Are we going to make a subscription? If you don't have that built in from the outset, then the chances are that you are going to fail, my friend.
Actually, it's one of those things that I've seen an awful lot of, actually, and I've had a few different people come and ask me to help them to add monetization after they've launched a product, and you're just kind of throwing your hands up in the air going, really? But what I wanted to kind of actually ask and kind of add on from what you're saying there, Brian, was in terms of the VR industry, it is one of the most common things that I'm seeing right now is that people are making content and they have no clue whatsoever how they are going to make their money back. It's not even a consideration or a question. So we have 2 different ends of the spectrum. We have people who are either creating 360 film content, and so the assumption is they're going to go to a brand or somebody who's got big marketing budgets or big PR budgets, and they're going to take that marketing or PR budget to make some VR content. And there's no expectation of return on investment or revenue for that matter. And then if you look at the other end of that spectrum, it's somebody who's making maybe more of an interactive VR gaming experience. There is limited expectation in terms of the understanding of what they should be doing from a monetization perspective. And so people are just kind of tacking on as existing games. It's an existing game model. So therefore we are going to go with, console gaming, or we're going to go with mobile gaming models because we know that works for games. Whether or not that works in the context of VR is still yet to really be proven. And yet that's where that's the fallback position people have, is either the freemium model of I'll get a brand to pay for it for PR marketing budget, or I'm not really quite sure what this thing is, so I'm going to treat it like it's a game or a mobile or console game. And I'm curious, whether either of you have kind of had any real conversations with anybody about alternative revenue models from a VR perspective, because I don't think anybody's really properly exploring the opportunity here.
I would have to agree. I don't think many people are, and I think it comes down to the fact that when it comes to VR, you either come at the whole technology from a particular vertical silo or a vertical market. So you come from film, or you come from animation, or you come from games. And I do think that a lot of people are having their perception of the market shaped by whatever channel they're finding VR through, as it were. So, we're talking about a medium where it's brand new. It's not just the content, it's not just the experience that can be built from the ground up. It could be the business model. It could be that VR is something that is subscription based. Who knows? It could be something that there's no free to play in it, or I doubt it would work if you got to a really exciting bit of the VR and you opened the door and it says you now need to pay £1 to see what's in this room. That would kind of suck. But I don't think people are looking at the business side. And again, I'm sorry to go back to it, but I think it's because in a lot of ways it's seen as not the developer's problem. The business side of things is something for the publisher to deal with. The fact that more and more companies who are content creators are also now their own publishers is being, so they're still thinking, oh, that's someone else's problem, rather than looking at it and building it in from the ground up. So I don't believe we've seen too much innovation in virtual reality in terms of the business models and in terms of the videos, the revenue streams. And it's something that has to change. It's something that has to change and really has to change quite quickly, because otherwise it runs the risk of sidelining VR and not letting it reach the kind of the critical mass where it's going to take it into the mainstream.
And it's interesting that you talk about, this idea that a lot of people are actually becoming their own publishers, because we're in that era now where technology exists that allows you to be both the creator and the publisher of this content, especially when it comes to VR. But very, very few people actually have that commercial experience or that commercial understanding of what it means to publish or distribute. And they kind of assume it's somebody else's problem or something that they need to kind of pass it off to Sony because, they're going to put it on a Sony PSVR. And then they're not even thinking about the possibility of being able to publish across other platforms beyond the PSVR. They're just like, I'm just doing it for the PSVR. That's it. And you're like, but that's not the only place people are going to try VR. But Liam, I'm curious from your perspective if you've had any conversations with anybody around revenue models that you think are quite interesting, or whether you think anybody's even talking about it.
The only other real revenue model that I've kind of seen would be within VR would be in-game advertisement. And that wouldn't be so much kind of like your freemium in-game advertisement. The kind of, ad pops up, you have to close it afterwards, you get back to the game. I'm talking about immersive advertisement. Say you're driving a car through a city, you see billboards which actually have different branding on them. It's a minimal amount of money, but it's still an avenue, a revenue stream. But it's interesting what Brian was saying about the kind of paywall when I open the door, pay some money to actually carry on the experience. The only thing I think with that is that developers are worried that that's going to smash the kind of the immersion with VR, and I think that's why they're not looking into that route, because they're just worried it's going to actually kill off their game or their title, because they're just someone's going to get to this paywall and go, well, that's ruined it for me because I'm now completely unimmersed.
And that's, I think, what Brian was kind of getting at.
Crazy.
Yeah.
That's it.
But this is the thing, guys. It's VR is surely the medium where product placement should be king. But I don't know anybody who's really sort of driving that forward and looking at potentially bringing in all the big brands. So you create, your virtual reality space or environment. And within that, you can drop in all of the branded products you want. So, there's a kind of actual Coke on the table.
Yeah.
And what happens is you get that from whichever store, be it wherever. But it's all linked together so that as people wander through, you get a little bit of money from Coca-Cola. That kind of thing is surely where virtual reality beats pretty much any other medium.
To be fair, I do know of a couple of people who are working on platforms that are, designed to do exactly this. But it does bring me, I'm going to keep on ranting about this until March 2018, but it does keep kind of bringing me back to Ready Player One. So if you haven't read Ready Player One yet, please go and read Ready Player One. But it just does take me back to that thing where he's in the Oasis and they can order the fast food and it turns up on their on their doorstep, having been immersed in the virtual world, eating pizza in the virtual world, the pizza physically turns up at his door. And it's kind of, I'm waiting for somebody to kind of twig and make that deal with whether it's a Domino's or a Pizza Hut or whoever, to have fast food delivered because you were playing a game in VR. I'm kind of waiting for somebody to twig that one, but go on.
But Tanya,
Mm-hmm.
sorry, you know that this is already happening within Facebook Messenger, the whole AI chatbot side of things. So you can actually have all of this hooked up. So as you talk to people, as you talk to folk within Facebook Messenger, you can go to Dom, the Domino's Pizza chatbot. You can book an Uber, you can book a KLM flight, you can get a hotel room. All of these things are now possible through your various chat and messenger apps. You can even play HTML5 games through Facebook Messenger, so you never have to leave the Facebook Messenger ecosystem. And I think, given that Facebook now own Oculus Rift, if they're not looking at the same kind of thing, so that every NPC that you interact with, every character you run across in a game, you can say, you know what, I'm hungry. And it gives you the option, or it pulls up and just says, your regular order, sir. Mm-hmm. That has to be happening in the background. We need to stop looking at VR as something standalone and look at it in the context of all of the other advances that are happening out there, like AI, like chatbots, like machine learning, blockchain, yada, yada, yada.
You're totally right in as much as the person who's going to get there first is going to be a social network. It's going to be a social VR experience like Facebook. And I do think as well that there's a huge amount of potential for things like Altspace VR and VTime as well to be able to integrate these kind of things. But you're totally right in as much as, integrating things like chatbots and AI and various other types of technology. I do think there is something really interesting there. And all the components are there. The technology is already here. It's just a case of somebody connecting all the dots and just making it happen. And maybe it'll be Amazon. You never know with their, where they're going. Maybe it'll be Amazon who gets there first. But I do think that it's something that hopefully we're going to see that kind of thing happening certainly within the next couple of years. If it takes longer than that, I'm seriously disappointed in a few people. But what I will say is this. As always, we like to ask you one of our big questions. And so I'm going to hurl this one at you. And because you've both been on the show before, I'm not going to go with a regular question. Instead, I'm going to say to you this, which is, if you were speaking to a new startup studio who are just about to dip their toe into the water when it comes to creating content, what would be the single piece of advice that you would give to them, the biggest, most important piece of advice that you would give to them as they step into this arena? And I'll start with you, Brian.
The single biggest piece of advice, making content is so whatever it is you're planning to make, that's just kind of 50% of the equation. How do you get it out to market? How are you going to make money out of it? How are you going to find your audience, user acquisition, user retention? It's like all of these are just as important. And I don't nearly enough companies let me try again, because that was I'm trying to restrain the outrage. Take advice from outside the game sector or the VR sector. Talk to people who run a tech company. Whatever you're making, that's just step one. Getting it to the market, monetizing it, and then supporting the audience that you hopefully find. That's how you get your long-term sustainability and give yourself the opportunity to either make the next product that you're hoping to launch or just allow your company to survive for more than a couple of years.
Okay. And Liam, what would be the one piece of advice that you would give to any new studio that's about to step into the fray?
Mine's quite close to Brian as well, I suppose, but mine would be being obviously business development, would be build your network. Go out there, go to events, and I don't just mean gaming events, I mean business funding shows or innovation events and such things like that, and find people that can A, help you with funding, B, actually be an accountant potentially for you, setting up your limited company, and that is a massive one, setting up a limited company. Without that, you're not going to be taken seriously. You're not going to get your funding, you're not going to get your tax credits back. Find an accountant, do your networking.
Okay, well, you've opened a can there because we haven't talked about EIS or SEIS at any point here because we were trying to steer away from the whole equity thing, but we didn't talk about that. And so what I will say is that in amongst all of that, they also need to become EIS and SEIS prepared and ready. So they need to be able to put in their application. And that does require that you have all your paperwork in a row and that you have registered for a limited company and all those other things that you need to do. And something as basic as, and I know this is going to sound stupid and crazy, but opening a business bank account
Wow.
It's a simple thing, people. But again, it's one of those things that a lot of people, they're just like, oh, we don't need to do that yet. We haven't launched a game, so we don't have a profit. So why would we need a bank account? And you're just like, okay, you really don't understand how this works. So just basic stuff. Open a business bank account. Right, but having said all of that, gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining us. But as always, we like to give our listeners a way to be able to find out a little bit more about you. And we ask you to do that by sharing with us your social media handle of choice. What would that be, Brian?
You can find me personally on @Flackboy. If you want to know more about the Scottish Games sector, it's @ScottishGames. And if you want to know more about the Scotland's technology sector in the widest possible sense, it's @DigitFYI.
And this is all on Twitter, correct?
All on Twitter.
Wonderful, thank you. And Liam, what about your good self?
So yeah, my main two Twitter handles would be @RiftBDM and @GamingTax.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review, and follow us on Twitter @DigitalJam Ltd. Thinking of starting your own podcast? Why not speak to the GL Pro UK team? They handle all of our podcasting service needs. Tell them that Digital Jam Session sent you, and you'll get 10% off your first order. Find out more at www.glpro.co.uk. digitaljamsessions.com